So good morning and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. We are very excited to start this session as part of the University Global Coalition Conference 2021. This session is called Strengthening the Local Value Chain of Research to Boost Development and Overcome Global Underrepresentation. And I am very excited to introduce our panelists for today. We have Jane Mariara. She is the Executive Director of the Partnership for Economic Policy. We have David Amya. He is the President and CEO of the International Center for Evaluation and Development that's based in Kenya. We have Charles Amate. He is the Program Director for the Development Impact West Africa Program, and that's part of the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration. And lastly, but not leastly, we have my colleague Tara Chu. She is the Associate Director of USAID's Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Markets, Risk, and Resilience based at the University of California in Davis. So we are going to get started. We only have about 45 minutes for this session and lots of important things to talk about. So David, I would like to turn first to you. The title of our session is has local value chain of research in that. And that may not be a familiar term for people. Could you start us off with a very brief description of what it is that we mean by the local value chain of research? Why is it important? And what exactly is it that might help us set the stage for the rest of the discussion?
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Jane, Tara, and Charles. I'm so happy to be part of this this discussion. We talk about value chain in agriculture, and other areas, but we don't talk about value chain in research. So as part of the capacity building of local capacity building, we borrowed the term value chain of research from agriculture. When you are talking about value chain, you are talking about starting from the input right down to the output. So in research, when we talk about value chain of research, what are we talking about? Research starts with conceptualization. Somebody has to sit down and think of a research hypothesis or theory. The process of going through that conceptualization, the process of putting that concept into design, research design, the process of coming up with your research hypothesis, the process of putting that hypothesis into research question, framing the proposal, submitting the proposal to a funder, going through the review, getting approval that the proposal has been accepted, going through the negotiation of the terms, the award, starting the actual research, going through all the research until the product, which are called the output of the research, the funding, packaging the fundings to meet the donor or the funder's interest, packaging the research for publication, packaging the research for policy, disseminating the research funding so that it can be used for action and development. That is a value chain. They are interconnected. It has an input, it has an output, and that is what we call value chain of research. So when we talk about local value chain, we are talking about people, local researchers, taking the whole process, going through the whole process, not that somebody do the input and you do the output section, or somebody do the output and you do the middle section, but going through the whole process, the whole life cycle of research. That is where we coin the term value chain of research. Thank you, Sophie.
Great, David. Thank you so much. Jane, I would love to move on to you. If you could jump in here with your thoughts, what have you learned about these issues as your role as Executive Director of the Partnership for Economic Policy? What steps have you and your organization been taking to address these issues? If you could share your thoughts, that would be great.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me first join David also by saying thank you very much for this opportunity to sit in this distinguished panel and talk about not just the issue of the value chain, but maybe first pick from where David has discussed and say why Morocco-led research is important. Maybe I could also mention the issues that come in there so that then we have maybe a gap between what we would want as inputs and outputs. And then I can talk about what we are doing as PEP to address the issues. So as David has said, the whole idea of the value chain, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in development, policy research, as he has mentioned, we really have to look at how we connect, maybe starting from the from the research problem to the policy problem, and then bringing in our local researchers to work on these particular issues and ensure that we combine inputs, approaches, methodologies, literature, technical expertise in order to get the desired output. Having said that, maybe the first thing I would want to say is that it is very important for the local researchers to be the drivers of this value chain. I'm saying because they can't necessarily just be alone. And one of the reasons why the local researchers should read or play a key role in the value chain is because the local perspective is always very important to ensure that the research in totality, from the agenda, from the questions to the objectives, is aligned with and is designed to address the issues that are relevant within their specific settings. That is the local settings. If you take an example of agriculture, agriculture is not just maybe a very broad maybe subject. It can be localized to actually pick on the local context, the questions on the ground, and it's actually the local policymakers and the local researchers that will be best suited to identify both the research question and the policy question that need to be addressed. Of course, it does not mean that the researchers who live and work in the specific context are necessarily just the ones who are most suited to study this, but a collaboration with a wide range of stakeholders, including the policymakers that I've talked about. It can include outside expertise, and this is where as PEP we bring in mentors who are not necessarily from the local areas, is actually very important. We also feel that there are other several reasons why the local based and local researchers are very important, because for the government and other stakeholders to have quick access to sound advice, and also to have updated empirical evidence as new development or policy issues emerge, then we need people who are on the ground, who understand the context, and who can actually maybe experiment with local policy variables and see how all this is changing. Having said that, we see that for this to happen and to bring in our inputs and ensure that we have the kind of output that David is talking about, there are quite a lot of barriers that come into play, especially for the southern researchers. And maybe just to pick a few, I don't have to talk about too many of them because I think they are well known. We have those which are related to the production of research, for instance, networking. For the local researchers, or especially in the global south, there's always a problem. We have issues to do with technology, especially in this in this period where we've had this kind of lockdowns, we have issues of funding. That is funding for research, funding for technological equipment, funding for access to literature and so forth, funding for maybe participation in networking activities. We have also the issue of skills because we know that in low-income countries, and especially fragile states, then maybe the level of skills is still at a level that needs to be boosted. And this is where then the collaboration with people from the North becomes important. Then, of course, there are issues related to publication in scientific journals, where partly because of the problems that I've talked earlier to do with research, we find that there's usually a gap in terms of access to publications, rather, especially when the local researchers want to publish in high-level journals. Having said that, to conclude, what is PEP doing about this? The model that we have in PEP, we have what we call a PEP Grant Plus model. And what we do is that we try to bridge this gap to ensure that we can have local researchers participate in driving the research process or the value chains, but also ensure that we do get maybe not exactly quality output, but at least ensure that first we are addressing some of the barriers that we have addressed through mentorship. For instance, we can try to bridge the gap of publication by ensuring that they can do good quality research, but at the same time, we also ensure that there's co-production that is local research being done by local researchers in conjunction with policy makers. So very quickly, what I would say is that the nature of our grant is that we will give money to the researchers. We ensure that we pair them with scientific mentors. We ensure that we pair them with policy mentors, and policy mentors are people who are good at both research and policy engagement. At the same time, we ensure that we have the networking opportunities, because when we pair them with mentors from the global north, then they would have the pre-COVID time, they would have time to go and spend time with these mentors in the institutions and work on the scientific components of their work. Of course, institutions like this, we are doing that through distant mentorship, as is happening in many other institutions. We then also ensure that we provide funds for them to access libraries or databases. We give them funds for that. We also give them incentives to publish in journals. We give them incentives to participate in international conferences and also to hold national, local conferences, national policy conferences, so that they can share their work with local policymakers and a wider range of stakeholders. But basically, I think the thing that I want to emphasize as I close is to say that what we have found very useful over the years is not just to provide resources, not just to provide the scientific mentorship, not just to provide the policy mentorship, but to ensure co-production such that researchers and policymakers start working together from the design of the project, so that the research questions and the policy questions are very well defined. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Wonderful, Jane. Thank you so much. I think that transitions nicely into you, Charles. I think you join us with kind of a unique two-sided perspective, right? You are both an active researcher at GIMBA and a current recipient of Allin funding, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then also, program director of the Allin Project, so an organization whose mission it is to strengthen kind of the value chain of research. So if you could touch briefly on kind of both aspects of that, both both as an active researcher and then as someone working to address some of these underrepresentation issues. Please. Charles, you're on mute, please. Can you unmute yourself?
All right, thank you so much. Great. So thank you very much once again for this opportunity. I think it's a very important issue, and I'm very happy that it's really being put here for discussion. As a researcher, I think I've identified about 5 key challenges that local researchers in this part of the world face. One is lack of mentorship. You know, research is a skill that is developed. Academic programs, degree programs don't really prepare you a lot for a career in research. Most of the time, the contents are meant to prepare you for work after school. So in some other countries, but where I studied, for example, in Germany, there's a very systematic process in place to mentor young faculty into doing more rigorous research. This you wouldn't find in this part, you know, especially in Ghana where I live. The other is that very, very limited research funds available. And so young researchers have ideas on, you know, research they can conduct to support government policies, but the resources to do that is not there. The other challenge is that sometimes you cannot do the research you want to because there is no funding in that particular area. And so you will see the situation where young researchers are moving from one area to the other. So somebody, today he gets funding to do something on cook stove as a source of energy. And then tomorrow there's another funding looking at maybe wind energy. And so being able to develop a particular career in a specific area of research, usually it's a big challenge. The other is the skills, okay, the very limited skills in conducting rigorous research, especially using quantitative methods. When it comes to issues like impact evaluation, RCTs, you see the capacity in these areas are quite limited. Now, if you are a university lecturer, usually the teaching load is so heavy. You know, universities are facing challenges with funding, and so they have to introduce new academic programs almost every year. And so teaching load keeps increasing and increasing. And so you don't have enough time to conduct research because the universities will have to survive. Yeah, the other is also the limited uptake. You know, young researchers are concerned that you do research, but you don't see evidence that this research outputs are being used by policymakers. So it's really not encouraging. And you could also see that there is really lack of interest in policymakers, you know, engaging with universities to conduct research and to use the evidence. And so those are major constraints. So research are being generated, but they are not meeting requirements or needs of policymakers. Policymakers don't seem to have, you know, strong appetite to really generate the evidence they need to support their policy decision making. So now let me turn to DIWA, which is the Development Impact West Africa Initiative. I think it's meant to address some of these challenges, and I'm very happy David has spoken about, you know, the Allin, and Jane also. I think quite similar projects, really, because the goal of DIWA is to develop local research capacity to conduct locally relevant policy research, right? So what we do is we go through a certain process. Number one is training, because we wanted to build capacity to conduct rigorous evaluation. So we started by identifying various policymakers, ministries, and then also researchers from various universities. We brought them together, took them through a month-long training program. It was during the COVID time, so it all now happened online, about 20 hours, 20 contact hours over a month. So after that, we then sent out, requests for proposals. So, we had funding between 15 and 50,000. So we had these researchers who had gone through the training, working together with policymakers to identify research that will be conducted together with the ministries. Naturally, the requirement for getting the grant is that you need to get the minister for that sector sign that that research is of priority and that evidence generated will be used. Without that, that proposal will not be considered. And so we then linked a local researcher who has been trained to a ministry. And then we identify researchers in the West. We did this in partnership with UC Berkeley. And so we got UC Berkeley affiliates who expressed interest in working with various local researchers on those thematic areas. And so it was a kind of a tripartite arrangement: mentors, local researchers, and policymakers. And they need to work together on the proposal and submit a proposal and get selected. So we managed to identify 9 projects which were selected because of the limited funding in Ghana, I think Benin and Nigeria. So we awarded the grants, and then some of the local researchers get also visiting fellowship, where they get the chance to travel to UC Berkeley and engage with their mentors over a whole semester. They are able to take courses, they make presentations at various conferences during their 4-month stay at UC Berkeley. So currently we have some of them who are there for the fall, others who go during the spring. Right, so we are expecting that by May next year, they should be able to generate results that, publish publications. And we hope that if we can continue with this for the next couple of years, it can significantly bridge the research gap that we currently face. Thank you, Sophie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Charles. This is just very kind of hearing both you, Jane, and Charles, kind of, and the work that you're doing. It's very, very uplifting. I'd like to.
Anyway, Sophie, just a moment. Let me just mention that
yes,
we are also now beneficiaries. I'm talking about DYE. So we are now beneficiaries of grants from the Allin, and so we are also now carrying out our own research to build our own internal capacity. So on one side, we are managers of grants, and then also we are recipients. Thank you very much.
That's fantastic. You're right in it. that's fantastic. So I'd like to. So we've been kind of hinting at this at Allin that Charles just mentioned. So I'd like to turn now to Tara. She, as the Associate Director of the Markets Risk and Resilience Innovation Lab, is a co-manager of the Allin Project. And I'd like for her to explain a little bit more about what that project is and how we came to launch that project and how it fits into this discussion. Tara, please.
Hi, and thanks so much, Sophie. As Sophie mentioned, I help manage a larger project called the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Markets Risk and Resilience. And it's a large research program that has many subawards and works with many different subaward institutions under that umbrella. And this particular time, we worked with USAID, and they were quite enthusiastic about the idea to start an initiative called Allin, or Advancing Local Leadership Innovation Networks. And this was to take half of all our research funding we had available and funnel it directly into African research institutions. Now, traditionally, what we would do when we were soliciting research projects is all of those projects would be led by US-based researchers. And the expectation was that they would partner with African research institutions in the country of research. And what we observed, to be quite candid about it, is that while we had this requirement, it was on paper and people would have these partnerships, but they wouldn't always be true, deep intellectual collaborations with owned leadership, intellectual ownership of the research project and results. We also observed that in our experience, some of the best policy impacts we observed in terms of our evidence actually being put into action was when these true intellectual collaborations existed. But we saw that there were some barriers to entry for African-based research institutions who may not be familiar with the grant administrative process, especially for large complex grants like those USAID tends to offer. So how to manage those research fundings. And they were kind of caught, a lot of institutions get caught in this cycle that I had when I was applying for my first job, which is nobody wants to give you experience until you have experience. And so we wanted to kind of initiate that process and try to overcome that barrier by actually kind of putting it out there and really working on engaging universities and researchers in a learning by doing role. So we also wanted to make sure that there was locally led leadership of these organizations. So we partnered with the organization run by David Amiot, who will be speaking next, to make sure that there was a managerial presence on continent as well that we could really rely on for their leadership of the broader research program in terms of helping with the research implementation and with the administrative management and building those capacities. One of the things there are many things that I would like to emphasize about this, but Jane and Charles actually spoke quite a lot about the barriers and the needs to be addressed in these, and I know David will more. One of the things I want to mention is that we're drawing together our cohort of African-led research and US-led research into one broader consortium. And one of the things we thought that was quite essential is, even though there are mentors specifically assigned to each project that are at a northern institution, we thought that building these networks and these opportunities for broader, bigger conversations around the issues in the field actually creates a more organic process, but in addition, helps build the capacity and build the opportunities for our US-based researchers, including the US-led research. A lot of times, US researchers, when they're looking for a host country institution, always rely on the same ones over and over again because that's who they know, which disadvantages to me both the US researchers and Global South researchers. So by building these networks, US researchers find this whole new network of high capacity, experienced researchers that they can turn to and expand their opportunities for collaboration and expand their network opportunities. In addition, a lot of times, Western researchers have a habit of going to policymakers who they want to use their research. At the end of research, they don't really have a lot of relationships with the institutions. And so it could be a bit awkward and low impact, frankly. So working with these African institutions, the US researchers can learn how to more effectively do that and can leverage the relationships a lot of times local institutions can develop more effectively. So we really view it as kind of a mutually beneficial relationship that also really allows US researchers to expand their networks and the potential for impacts on their side. But I'll defer to you for any additional comments you might want.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tara. You know, it's good to understand that perspective from the other side. David, I would love for you also to kind of chime in here. If you could take us, so you are the co-manager of the Allin Project. On the other side, kind of partnering with Tara. What can you tell us about how this Allin Project is playing a role in the value chain of research, and why is it kind of so important that this kind of project like Allin is part of this attempt to restructure the value chain of research for greater kind of development impacts? Can you tell us a little bit about that? You're on mute, David, please. Could you unmute yourself?
I will use an analog of a country in Africa that I was in the Civil War for a long time, and 1996, I had an opportunity of USAID work to go there. And the mantra in that country was that they don't have capacity. That was 1996. 2006, by working with US government, I was able to go to that country. And the same thing, 10 years, the same word were being used. They don't have capacity. And the idea came, how can the country have capacity until we give the development of their program to them. And as we all know, we don't build capacity when you don't get opportunity to practice. And all in, you know, when Tara, Michael, Sophie, we sat down to discuss this thing, we said, research have a value chain. If you place somebody in the middle of the value chain or at the receiving end of the value chain, they will not have the whole complete picture. It's like agriculture. If he's a trader in a supermarket, you know, there are so many children who eat chicken, but they have never seen a live chicken before. You know, there are so many people who eat apple, but they have never seen an apple tree before. Therefore, for somebody to have a complete picture of what a research conceptualization research is, you should give that person design. And that is what All In is about. As Tala said, we said, in order to support USA strategic objective, global strategic objective of building local capacity in research, we are not going to sit down for somebody to write proposal in the global north and then go to global south and find a partner who will just support the partner in global south in data collection. As Jane and Charles said, why don't we put them in the driver's seat? Yes, they may make a mistake. Yes, they may have an accident. Yes, we are hoping that the accident will not cause fatality, you know. But in the course of doing those things, they will build experience. They may be able to lead. And that is what All In is about. We are putting global south researchers to sit down, start from the input part of research, conceptualization, design, writing the proposal, defending the proposal, managing the grant. We are working, Tara can say, we are working with a big university, and they have never managed a grant more than 20,000 before. And we are now telling these people to manage almost $500,000 grant. And we are helping them, shepherding them, opening grant accounts, you know, recruiting grant manager, all those things. We are hoping that at the end of the 3 years, this institution will have their capacity developed, not built, developed, so that not only All In, but they can work with other donors to really shape research that can shape the destiny of their people and their country and their continent.
Great, thank you so much, David. So we are kind of into our Q&A time, but I'm not sure if the audience is listening in. Please feel free to add some questions into the chat if you'd like to. While we're waiting to see if any questions do come in, I'd like to propose a question to all of you. So you are all working very impressively on this issue of trying to build up to develop the capacity of local researchers to overcome, you know, these constraints that you've all identified so clearly. What has been working the best so far? We've talked about, you know, developing, you know, capacity around funding and management. We've talked about mentorship. I just wanted to kind of dig in a little bit around what's kind of next. What's the next step that you feel is really going to make the greatest impacts in shifting this kind of balance of leadership more sustainably? How about Jane? Would you like to jump in first, and then maybe Charles?
Okay. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll put it a bit differently. Maybe looking at maybe more what more can be done in addition to what we've already done. I think as we are sitting around this table, we are doing more or less the same thing, and I think we are addressing the same issues. Picking from where David has just left in terms of the capacity building, I think the way I see it is that we've come from very far and we continue coming very close. We are building capacity of these researchers, but I think this is kind of an address continuum, because in the world, I think knowledge is increasing. And so though we are training a lot of researchers, we are building their capacity in the various ways that we are doing, the gap could also be widening in the sense that the counterparts or the would-be counterparts in the north are also moving in another direction, because science is and technology are actually changing. So I think we must continue thinking about smarter ways of building capacity if we are ever going to continue narrowing the gap. Okay, that is one. I think the second one is how to ensure that we continue transferring knowledge from the south, from the north to the south. The mentorship model that we have, for instance, and I'm sure it's happening even with the All-in, even with DIWA and so forth. Okay, it's good enough if through one project, with help of mentorship, we can ensure that the researchers that we have trained can move to the next level of producing high quality research, be able to publish in okay, I know there are different categorization of journals, but I would call it maybe the highest tier of journals, like their counterparts in the rest of the world. But we know that that actually takes quite a lot of time. So the point is, what do we need to do in order to ensure that even with this kind of mentorship, again, that gap is crossing? And then maybe finally, I would say that we need to see how we continue promoting the value of local knowledge by showing the effective, okay, how do I put it? The kind of impact that the local researchers that have been trained in this form have on their economies. If we train these researchers and then they are able to influence local policy, if that is very clear, then we start changing the game on the ground, because then there will be the people that will go to actually engage in these activities. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, your audio was a little bit kind of funky, but I think we got the gist. Thank you so much. So Charles, maybe if you could add some thoughts to that.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Well, what I would say is now we talk about sustainable development. I think that Africans, should start taking their destinies into their hands. I think there's a lot we can do on our own. Most of these researches sometimes are not really capital intensive. I mean, just some little commitment, we can be able to come up with, research work that really can be very useful in supporting some evidence decision making. So we shouldn't really look up to funding a lot from, international organizations. I think we want to see some local commitment, because you see, once donors are funding research, they will set the agenda for the type of research that you should do. So if, for example, you were concerned about, renewable energy, it might not be a priority for the donor. The donor might be interested in, something else. So I think that a lot will have to be done in really our governments committing. For example, in Ghana, we are pushing government to allocate just 1% of GDP to support research work at the various, universities. And I hope that if this should go through, it probably transform, research work in Ghanaian universities. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Charles. Am I coming through clearly? David, can you unmute yourself and please jump in?
Sophie, I'm not hearing you well.
So, David, did you have anything to add? I think Sophie's having a bit of an issue with her connection, so I think she was just asking if you had anything to add.
Oh, yes, I think we have our time. The only thing that I would love to add is that capacity building has so many ways of doing it, but what we have put in all in is a great, and what Jane is doing with PEP, what Charles is doing, are all initiatives that we are trying to put in place so that research is not just an end, it's a means to an end. In the final analysis, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we use research to improve livelihood of people? How do we use research to shape policies that are affecting the livelihood of people? How do we use research so that the generation that we have and the new generation that are coming can have a scientific evidence, rigorous evidence to make informed decisions? And the idea is that both in the North, global South and global North, nobody can do it better than people who live in the context and the environment of the happenings. And that is what we are talking about here. Research is a means. The end should be what justifies the means, not the means justifying the end. And we are looking forward to a time where there will be publications, where there will be academic journals that people, local policymakers all over the world can have access to it and use it to make policies that affect livelihood and community of their people.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. I see that we're running short on time. So I just wanted to end by thanking all of the panelists for joining us and sharing more about the work you're doing. I see, as Jane was saying, this huge effort that we're all doing in our own ways. So I hope we can continue to build on that momentum with some of the ideas that were shared here, both in terms of what's been working and what still needs to be done. Again, thank you very much. If you would like to know more about the Allin initiative, I dropped some web links in the chat for you to follow up. And I wanted to let you know that after this event, a recording will be made available. So thank you so much. Oh, great. Jane has added a connection to her work. And Charles, if you would like to drop any resources in the chat to follow up as well, that would be greatly appreciated. I think that's it on our end. Again, thank you so much. We're so glad we were able to participate, and thank you for joining us.